I was staring at my brand new backup generator through the kitchen window when I saw the tow truck pull up to my driveway. And something in my gut told me this was about to become the worst week of my life. The generator had cost me $3,000, a hefty chunk of my savings, but living in Coral Springs, Florida, where hurricanes could knock out power for days or even weeks, it seemed like a smart investment. I had just installed it 2 days ago. Carefully positioning it on a concrete pad, I poured myself at the side of my house. It was bolted down, properly grounded, and far enough from the property line that I thought there would not be any issues. The manual said it needed to be at least 5 feet from the house for ventilation, and I had measured everything twice. I bolted outside, still holding my coffee mug. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted at the tow truck driver, a heavy-set guy in his 40s who was already attaching chains to my generator. He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just doing my job, buddy. Got a work order to remove this." "A work order? From who?" He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Pinewood Estates HOA. Says here this is an unauthorized structure that violates community guidelines." I felt my blood pressure spike. The HOA. Of course it was the HOA. That's ridiculous. This is a backup generator. It's not a structure, it's equipment, and I'm allowed to have one on my property. The driver shrugged. "Look, man, I don't make the rules. I just haul stuff. You got a problem, take it up with them. I got the paperwork right here signed by." He squinted at the signature. Brenda Patterson, HOA president. Brenda. I should have known. She had moved into the neighborhood about 8 months ago and immediately ran for HOA president, winning by default because nobody else wanted the job. Since then, she had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in the HOA covenant, no matter how petty or outdated. Just wait a second," I said, pulling out my phone. "Let me call someone. You cannot just take my property." "Actually, according to this order, I can. It says here you were notified 3 times about the violation and failed to remove it." "I was never notified about anything." The driver pointed to a paragraph on the work order. "Says here notices were left at your door on the 15th, 17th, and 20th of last month." I thought back. I had been out of town for work from the 14th through the 22nd, visiting my brother in Atlanta. My neighbor had been collecting my mail, but nobody had mentioned anything about notices. I was out of town. I never saw any notices. Not my problem, buddy. I got a job to do. I watched helplessly as he continued securing the chains. "Where are you taking it?" "Impound lot off of Sample Road. You can retrieve it once you pay the fines and get clearance from the HOA. "How much are the fines?" He consulted his paperwork again. "Let me see here. Initial violation fine is $250. Then it's $100 per day for 20 days of non-compliance. That's $2,000, plus the towing fee, which is $300, and storage is $50 per day." He did some quick math in his head. "So you are looking at about $2,500 to get it back today. More if you wait. $2,500. To get back the generator I had just spent $3,000 on. I felt like I was going to be sick. This is insane. This is theft." "It's in your HOA covenant, Section 12, subsection C. No external mechanical equipment visible from the street without prior written approval. You can read it yourself." He tapped the paper. "The generator is not visible from the street. It's on the side of my house." "Take it up with the HOA, man. I'm just the tow guy." I called Brenda's number, which was listed on our neighborhood website. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, this is Brenda Patterson, Pinewood Estates HOA president. I'm unable to take your call right now, but your concerns are important to me. Please leave a detailed message and I will get back to you within 48 business hours. Brenda, this is Henry Armstrong from 2847 Pinewood Drive. Your tow truck is at my house right now taking my backup generator, and I was never notified about any violation. I need you to call me back immediately. I left my number and hung up. The driver had already loaded the generator onto his flatbed. It looked almost comical, this big piece of equipment chained down like it was some kind of dangerous criminal. Sorry, buddy, the driver said, climbing into his cab. For what it's worth, the HOA lady seemed like a real piece of work when I talked to her. Good luck. He drove off, leaving me standing in my driveway, still holding my now cold coffee. I went inside and immediately pulled up the HOA covenant on my laptop. Sure enough, there it was in Section 12, subsection C. No external mechanical equipment, including but not limited to generators, air conditioning units, pool pumps, or similar devices, shall be visible from any public street or neighboring property without prior written approval from the HOA board. But my generator was not visible from the street. I had specifically positioned it so that it was hidden behind a privacy fence on the side of the house. You would have to walk into my yard to see it. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, Tom Henderson, who lived next door. Tom, hey, it's Henry. Quick question. Can you see my generator from your property? Your what? The backup generator I installed on the side of my house. Can you see it from your yard? Hold on, let me look. I heard him walking, then a door opening. No, I don't see anything. Why? The HOA just had it towed. They're saying it violates the covenant. Are you kidding me? Brenda strikes again. You've had problems with her too? Tom laughed bitterly. Last month she sent me a violation notice because my house number plaque was the wrong shade of bronze. Said it had to be antique bronze, not oil-rubbed bronze. I had to pay a $150 fine and replace it. You're joking. I wish I was. And the Hendersons 3 houses down got fined because their mailbox was 2 inches too far to the left. She actually came out and measured it. This is insane. Welcome to life under Brenda's regime, buddy. Good luck getting your generator back. I spent the next hour trying to reach Brenda, calling and texting with no response. Finally, I decided to drive over to her house, which was on the other side of the neighborhood, one of the larger homes with a perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I rang the doorbell. A moment later, Brenda opened the door. She was exactly what you would expect. Mid-40s, blonde hair in that specific Karen style that somehow defied description, but you knew it when you saw it, and an expression that suggested she had been sucking on lemons for the past decade. Can I help you? She asked, even though she clearly recognized me. Brenda, I'm Henry Armstrong from Pinewood Drive. You had my generator towed this morning. Oh yes, the illegal generator. I did receive your rather aggressive voicemail. Aggressive? I just asked you to call me back, and it's not illegal. It's a backup generator. It's a violation of our community guidelines, Mr. Armstrong. Section 12, subsection C clearly states, I know what it says, but the generator is not visible from the street or neighboring properties. I specifically positioned it to comply with the covenant. Brenda's smile was thin and condescending. I inspected your property myself, Mr. Armstrong, and I could clearly see the generator from the street. That's impossible. There's a 6-foot privacy fence. I have photos, she interrupted, pulling out her phone. She showed me several pictures, and I had to admit, you could barely see a corner of the generator if you stood at a very specific angle at the end of my driveway and looked through a gap in the fence. That's ridiculous. You can see maybe 3 inches of it through a crack in the fence. That does not count as visible. The covenant does not specify how visible. Visible is visible, And furthermore, you failed to respond to 3 notices. I was out of town. I never saw them. That's not the HOA's problem, Mr. Armstrong. It's your responsibility to ensure you receive all communications. Perhaps you should have made arrangements. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. Fine. What do I need to do to get my generator back? Pay the fines and storage fees. Submit a written request for approval to have the generator on your property. Wait for the board to review your request at our next meeting, which is in 3 weeks, and if approved, you can retrieve it and reinstall it in a location that is not visible from any angle. 3 weeks. And what if I need the generator before then? She shrugged. You should have thought of that before violating the covenant. I want to appeal this. You can submit a written appeal to the board. It will be reviewed at the same meeting. This is ridiculous. You're basically holding my property hostage. Her expression hardened. Mr. Armstrong, I suggest you watch your tone. The HOA has the legal right to enforce community standards. If you have a problem with that, you shouldn't have moved into an HOA community. Now, if you will excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, fuming. Then I got back in my car and drove to the impound lot. The lot was a depressing place, filled with cars in various states of disrepair surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. I found my generator sitting near the entrance, looking completely out of place among the vehicles. The guy at the office window was young, maybe early 20s, with headphones around his neck. I'm here about my generator that was just brought in. He typed something into his computer. Name, Henry Armstrong. Yeah, here it is. That'll be $300 for the tow, plus today's storage fee of $50, so $350 total. I thought I had to pay the HOA fines too. Not to us. You pay us to release the item, but you still owe the HOA their fines. That's between you and them. I pulled out my credit card. At least I could get the generator back and reinstall it. One problem, though, the kid said. I need a release form from the HOA before I can let you take it. Of course. Of course there was another catch. Are you serious? Sorry, man, that's what it says here. Item can only be released with HOA authorization. I drove back home, feeling defeated. I called my brother Marcus in Atlanta, who was a lawyer. HOAs have a lot of power, Marcus said after I explained the situation. Unfortunately, when you bought the house, you agreed to abide by their covenants, but this does sound excessive. The key issue is whether you were properly notified. If you can prove you never received those notices, you might have grounds to fight the fines. They said they left them at my door. Did they? Or did they just say they did? Do they have proof of delivery? I don't know. That's what you need to find out. Get copies of everything. The notices, the photos, the covenant language. Document everything. And I would suggest showing up to that board meeting with a lawyer. I cannot afford a lawyer right now, Marcus. Then represent yourself, but be prepared. Read up on HOA law in Florida, and whatever you do, stay calm. Do not give them ammunition by losing your temper. Too late for that, I thought, remembering my conversation with Brenda. I spent the rest of the day researching Florida HOA law. It turned out Marcus was right. HOAs did have significant power, but they also had to follow proper procedures. Notices had to be delivered properly, usually by certified mail or personal delivery with proof. A notice left at a door with no confirmation of receipt might not be sufficient, especially if the homeowner was out of town. I drafted a formal appeal letter, citing the improper notification and questioning the interpretation of visible from the street. I printed 3 copies and hand-delivered one to Brenda's house that evening, keeping one for myself and planning to bring one to the board meeting. Brenda barely glanced at it when she answered the door. "I'll make sure the board receives this," she said, and closed the door again. The next 2 weeks crawled by. I kept checking the weather forecast obsessively. Hurricane season was in full swing, and there was a tropical system developing in the Atlantic that had meteorologists concerned. It was too early to tell if it would hit Florida, but the possibility was there. I called Brenda multiple times, trying to at least get the release form so I could pay the storage fees and get my generator out of the impound lot, even if I could not reinstall it yet. She never answered, never returned my calls. The storage fees were adding up. After a week, I owed another $350 on top of the initial towing fee. After 2 weeks, it was $700. Finally, the night before the HOA board meeting, I got a call from Tom Henderson. "Henry, have you been watching the weather?" "Yeah, why?" "That tropical system. It just got upgraded to a hurricane, Hurricane Nicole, and it's heading straight for South Florida. Expected to hit in about 5 days. My stomach dropped. "You're kidding." I wish I was. "Cat 3, possibly Cat 4 by the time it gets here. This is going to be bad." I pulled up the weather on my laptop. Sure enough, Hurricane Nicole was now a swirling mass of red and orange on the radar, projected to make landfall somewhere between West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale. We were right in the middle of that zone. The next morning, I showed up to the HOA board meeting 30 minutes early. It was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was usually used for birthday parties and the occasional exercise class. Brenda was already there, along with 3 other board members I vaguely recognized from neighborhood events. There was Gary, an older retired guy who mostly seemed to nod along with whatever Brenda said, Patricia, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, and Mike, who at least had the decency to look somewhat uncomfortable with the whole proceedings. "Mr. Armstrong," Brenda said as I walked in. "I trust you are here about your generator appeal." "Yes, I am. And I need to talk to you about getting it back immediately. There is a hurricane coming." "I am aware of the weather, Mr. Armstrong. We will discuss your appeal when we get to it on the agenda." "When will that be?" She consulted her papers. "We have several items to cover first, probably in about an hour." I took a seat in the small audience area. 2 other homeowners were there, apparently also dealing with violations. Over the next hour, I watched as the board discussed a proposal to change the approved paint colors for houses, debated whether to install new lighting at the entrance, and reviewed the budget for landscaping. Finally, they got to my appeal. "Next we have the appeal from Mr. Henry Armstrong regarding the removal of an unauthorized generator," Brenda said. "Mr. Armstrong, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood up, pulling out my notes. "Thank you. First, I want to address the notification issue. The HOA claims I was notified 3 times about this violation, but I was out of town during all 3 supposed notifications. I never received any notices. According to Florida Statute 720, HOA notices for fines must be delivered by certified mail or with proof of delivery. Leaving a notice at a door is not sufficient, especially when there is no confirmation it was received." Brenda interrupted. "We have photos of the notices at your door." "Photos of papers at a door do not prove I received them. Anyone could have taken them, or the wind could have blown them away. The point is, I never saw them." Patricia, the stern board member, spoke up. "Mr. Armstrong, it is your responsibility to ensure you receive HOA communications. How am I supposed to receive something when I'm not there and you do not use proper delivery methods? If you had sent it certified mail to my address, my neighbor who was collecting my mail would have signed for it and held it for me." Mike, the uncomfortable-looking board member, nodded slightly. "He has a point about the certified mail." Brenda shot him a look. The covenant does not specify the delivery method. But Florida state law does, I said. And state law supersedes HOA covenants when there is a conflict. Brenda's expression tightened. We will take that under advisement. What about the visibility issue? I pulled out my phone and showed them photos I had taken. The generator is not visible from the street. You have to stand at a very specific angle at the end of my driveway and look through a tiny gap in my privacy fence to see a corner of it. That's not reasonably visible. The spirit of the covenant is to prevent unsightly equipment from being prominently displayed. My generator is hidden behind a 6-foot fence. The letter of the law states visible, not prominently visible, Brenda countered. The letter of the law also requires reasonable interpretation. If we are going to enforce it the way you are suggesting, then everyone in this neighborhood is in violation of something. I can see the corner of Tom Henderson's air conditioning unit through his fence. I can see the top of the Wilsons' pool pump through their gate. Should we tow all of those too? Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Furthermore, I continued, there is a hurricane coming, a major hurricane. In 5 days, we could be without power for weeks. I need that generator. I have medical equipment that requires power. It was a slight exaggeration. I had a CPAP machine for sleep apnea, which technically was medical equipment, even if it was not life-threatening to be without it for a while. You should have thought about that before installing it without approval, Brenda said. I did not think I needed approval because it was not visible from the street. Nevertheless, the board will take your appeal under consideration and notify you of our decision within 10 business days. 10 business days. The hurricane will be here in 5 days. That's the standard timeline, Mr. Armstrong. Mike spoke up again. Brenda, given the emergency situation, maybe we should expedite this. We could vote right now. The process is the process, Mike. We need time to review all the information. What information? It is all right here. The guy needs his generator back. There is a hurricane coming, and frankly, I think we were too aggressive with this enforcement in the first place. Are you undermining my authority as president? I'm saying maybe we should use some common sense. Brenda stood up abruptly. Fine. Let's vote right now. All in favor of denying Mr. Armstrong's appeal and upholding the fines. Brenda and Patricia raised their hands. Gary looked between them and Mike, clearly uncomfortable, then slowly raised his hand. All opposed. Mike raised his hand. The motion passes. Mr. Armstrong, your appeal is denied. You must pay all outstanding fines and storage fees and submit a new application for approval to install the generator in a location that is not visible from any angle. This meeting is adjourned. I stood there, stunned. You cannot be serious. There is a hurricane coming. Then I suggest you make arrangements to evacuate if you are concerned about power, Mr. Armstrong. This meeting is over. I looked at Mike, who shrugged helplessly. I tried, man. I walked out of the community center feeling like I had been punched in the gut. The fine was now up to about $3,000 with the storage fees. Even if I paid it, Brenda was not going to give me the release form to get the generator out of impound. That evening, the news was full of updates about Hurricane Nicole. It had strengthened to a Category 4 with winds of 140 miles per hour. The projected path had narrowed, and Coral Springs was right in the center of the cone. Evacuation orders were being issued for coastal areas. Stores were running out of water, batteries, and plywood. I called Marcus again. They denied the appeal, and there is a Cat 4 hurricane coming in 4 days. What are my options? Legally, you could file an injunction, but that takes time you do not have. You could pay the fines under protest and then sue for reimbursement later, but you would need to prove the HOA acted improperly, which could take months or years. So I'm screwed. Probably, yeah. I'm sorry, man. HOAs are incredibly difficult to fight, especially in the short term. They have all the leverage. I thought about it for a moment. What if I just go get the generator anyway? You mean steal it back? It's my property. That the HOA legally seized according to the covenant you signed. If you take it without authorization, that's theft. You could be arrested. So what do I do? Honestly, buy another generator if you can afford it. Keep your head down, ride out the hurricane, and then fight this through proper channels afterward. But generators were sold out. I spent the next day driving to every Home Depot, Lowe's, and hardware store within 50 miles. Nothing. Everyone had the same idea. 3 days before the hurricane was supposed to hit, I drove past Brenda's house. She had a generator. A big, expensive one, sitting prominently in her side yard, clearly visible from the street. No fence, no attempt to hide it. I took photos, lots of them, from multiple angles. Then I drove to Patricia's house, the board member who had voted with Brenda. She had a generator too, also visible from the street. I documented everything. 2 days before the hurricane, the governor declared a state of emergency. Schools were closed. Mandatory evacuations were issued for coastal zones. But Coral Springs was far enough inland that we were only under a voluntary evacuation. Most people were staying put, boarding up windows and stocking up on supplies. I spent the day securing my house as best I could, putting up storm shutters and bringing in everything from the yard that could become a projectile. I filled the bathtub with water and stocked up on non-perishable food. The day before the hurricane hit, the whole neighborhood was a ghost town. People who had evacuated were gone. People who were staying were hunkered down inside. The sky had an eerie yellow-gray color and the air felt thick and electric. I tried one more time to reach Brenda. This time, surprisingly, she answered. "Mr. Armstrong, I have nothing more to say to you. Pay your fines or do not, but stop harassing me. I noticed you have a generator at your house, Brenda, clearly visible from the street. Section 12, subsection C, remember, there was a pause. That's different. How is it different? As HOA president, I have authorization to make decisions about my own property in emergency situations. That's not how the covenant works. You are supposed to follow the same rules as everyone else. Are you threatening me, Mr. Armstrong? I am pointing out hypocrisy. Patricia has a visible generator too, but you towed mine. This conversation is over. Do not call me again." She hung up. That night, the outer bands of Hurricane Nicole reached Coral Springs. The wind picked up, howling through the trees. Rain began to fall, heavy and relentless. I checked the news constantly. The storm had maintained Category 4 strength and was expected to make landfall around 3 in the morning. I did not sleep. I sat in my living room, listening to the wind get progressively louder, watching my windows rattle in their frames even with the shutters. The power was still on, but I knew it was only a matter of time. At 2:30 in the morning, the lights flickered. Then they went out. I turned on my battery-powered radio and listened to the emergency broadcast. Nicole had made landfall near Fort Lauderdale with winds of 135 miles per hour. We were getting the full brunt of it. The house shook. I heard something crash outside, probably a tree branch or maybe someone's patio furniture that had not been secured properly. The wind sounded like a freight train, a constant roar that went on and on. I thought about my generator, sitting uselessly in an impound lot, while I huddled in the dark listening to my house get battered by hurricane-force winds. The storm lasted hours. It was the longest night of my life. But finally, around dawn, the wind began to die down. The rain continued, but the worst had passed. When it was light enough to see, I ventured outside to assess the damage. My yard was covered in branches and debris. A section of my fence had blown down. My neighbor's mailbox was in my driveway. But my house seemed structurally sound, at least from what I could see. The power was still out. I walked through the neighborhood. Everyone was emerging from their homes looking dazed. Trees were down everywhere. Some houses had damaged roofs. The community entrance sign had been ripped off its posts, and then I saw Brenda's house. Her generator was running. I could hear the steady hum from the street. Her lights were on. Patricia's generator was running too, but everyone else, including me, was without power. I walked back home and called the power company. The automated message said that over 200,000 customers were without power in the area, and restoration could take up to 2 weeks due to the extensive damage. 2 weeks. I still had cell service, so I got on the neighborhood Facebook page. It was blowing up with people complaining about the power outage, asking if anyone had a generator they could borrow, sharing information about where to get ice and supplies. Someone posted, "I see the HOA president has power. Must be nice." The comments quickly filled with angry responses. "Of course Brenda has a generator. Rules for thee but not for me. She towed my generator last year for being visible. Hers is right in her front yard. Same thing happened to Henry Armstrong. She towed his generator literally days before the hurricane." People were tagging me in the comments. I decided to chime in. That's correct. My generator was towed 8 days ago for being visible from the street even though it was behind a privacy fence. I was denied the ability to get it back despite a hurricane warning. Meanwhile, Brenda and Patricia both have generators clearly visible from the street. I have photos. I posted the photos. The comments exploded. People were furious. Someone started a petition to recall Brenda as HOA president. Within hours, it had over 100 signatures. Tom Henderson came over to my house that afternoon. "Dude, you've become the face of the anti-Brenda movement." "I didn't mean to. I just posted the truth." "Well, people are pissed. This might actually go somewhere." Day 2 without power was worse than day 1. The food in my refrigerator was spoiling. It was hot and humid without air conditioning. My phone was running low on battery, and with no power to charge it, I was trying to conserve it. I drove around looking for ice and found a gas station that had some, but the line was 2 hours long. I waited, got my ice, and went back home to salvage what I could from my fridge. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Armstrong. This is Rebecca Willis from Channel 7 News. I saw your post in the Pinewood Estates group about your generator being towed before the hurricane. We'd like to do a story about it. Would you be willing to talk on camera?" I thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. "Yes, absolutely." They came to my house the next morning, day 3 without power. The reporter, Rebecca, was professional and sympathetic. I showed her where my generator had been, explained the whole situation, showed her the photos of Brenda's and Patricia's generators. "And the HOA refused to give you your generator back even with a hurricane warning?" Rebecca asked on camera. "That's correct. I appealed to the board 3 days before the hurricane hit. They denied it. The president, Brenda Patterson, said I should evacuate if I was concerned about power." "But you are not in an evacuation zone." "Correct. We were under a voluntary evacuation, not mandatory. Most people in the neighborhood stayed." "And how many of those people have power right now?" "None, except for the HOA board members who have generators." "Did anyone else have their generators towed?" "I don't know for sure, but I have not seen any other generators running in the neighborhood except for Brenda Patterson's and Patricia Cole's, both board members." They also interviewed Tom Henderson, who confirmed that his air conditioning unit was visible through his fence, but had never been flagged as a violation. They got footage of Brenda's and Patricia's generators running. The story aired that evening. I watched it on my phone, burning through precious battery. It was damning. The reporter framed it as HOA hypocrisy leaves homeowners in the dark after hurricane. Within hours, it had gone viral on social media. People across the country were sharing it, commenting about their own HOA horror stories, and then my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Henry, I just saw the news story. This is big, really big." "Yeah, it's blowing up online." "No, I mean legally big. I did some research." "What Brenda did might actually be illegal." "What do you mean?" "Florida law specifically prohibits HOAs from banning backup generators in hurricane-prone areas. It is in Florida Statute 720.3045. The law was passed a few years ago after Hurricane Irma. HOAs cannot prohibit generators, and they cannot require pre-approval for their installation as long as they meet safety standards and manufacturer guidelines." I felt my heart start to pound. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Your HOA covenant is unenforceable on this issue because it contradicts state law. Brenda had no legal right to tow your generator in the first place. So what do I do? You sue. And you might want to contact the local police, because if she knowingly enforced a rule that violated state law, especially with a hurricane coming, that could potentially be criminal. Theft at minimum. She essentially stole your property under false pretenses. And there might be other charges. I would need to research it more, but this is bad for her." I sat there, absorbing this information. Then I called the Coral Springs Police Department. The officer who took my statement was skeptical at first, but when I explained the situation and mentioned the Florida statute, he became more interested. He said he would forward it to a detective, and someone would follow up with me. That night, I posted an update in the neighborhood group. Update. I spoke with a lawyer who informed me that Florida Statute 720.3045 specifically prohibits HOAs from banning or restricting backup generators in hurricane-prone areas. The HOA covenant section that was used to tow my generator is unenforceable and violates state law. I have filed a police report and will be pursuing legal action. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People started posting about filing their own complaints. Someone found the actual statute and posted the full text. Multiple people who had generators but were too afraid to install them because of the HOA rules said they were going to install them now. And then Brenda posted a response. As HOA president, I was acting within the authority granted to me by the community covenant. Any disputes should be handled through proper legal channels, not through social media which hunts. This kind of harassment and defamation is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. That just made people angrier. By day 4, some power had been restored in the area, but not in our neighborhood. The power company said our section had significant infrastructure damage, and it would be at least another week. I was running out of food. My phone was dying. I was hot, tired, and irritable. But I was also energized by the knowledge that I might actually have a case against Brenda and the HOA. The detective called me that afternoon. His name was Detective Morrison, and he sounded professional but interested. "Mr. Armstrong, I've reviewed your complaint. I've also done some research on this Florida statute you mentioned. It's legitimate. Can you come down to the station and give a formal statement?" I drove to the police station, where Detective Morrison took a detailed statement. He asked for copies of all my documentation, the photos, the HOA covenant, the appeal letter, everything. "The issue here," he explained, "is whether we can prove criminal intent. Mrs. Patterson could argue she was simply unaware of the statute. But she is the HOA president. Isn't it her responsibility to know the law? Civilly, yes. She could definitely be sued. Criminally, it is harder to prove. However, the fact that she and another board member have their own generators visible from the street, while she towed yours for the same reason, shows a pattern of discriminatory enforcement. That strengthens the case. What happens now? I will continue the investigation. I will need to interview Mrs. Patterson and the other board members. I will probably also need to check if there are other similar cases in the neighborhood. This might take a few weeks to build properly. A few weeks? I still don't have my generator back. Well, here is the good news. Based on what you have told me and the statute violation, you have grounds to retrieve your property immediately. The tow was illegal. You shouldn't need HOA authorization. The impound lot said they needed an HOA release form. Not if the tow was illegal. You might need to get a court order, but a judge should grant it immediately given the circumstances and the hurricane situation. I can write a letter on police letterhead explaining that the tow is under investigation and appears to have been conducted in violation of state law. That might be enough for the impound lot. He printed the letter right there and gave it to me. I drove straight to the impound lot. The same kid from before was at the window. I'm back about my generator. He looked me up. Dude, you owe like $1,500 in storage fees now. I have a letter from the police department stating the tow was illegal. I handed him the letter. He read it, looking increasingly uncomfortable. I need to talk to my manager about this. He disappeared into the back office. 10 minutes later, a middle-aged woman came out. Mr. Armstrong, I'm Denise, the lot manager. I read this police letter. This is unusual. The HOA violated Florida state law when they towed my generator. I should never have had to pay anything. I want my generator back, and I want a refund of the towing fees I already paid. Sir, I understand you're upset, but we were contracted by the HOA. We did our job based on their authorization. Authorization they did not legally have. This letter states the tow is under criminal investigation. She reread the letter. I need to make some calls. Can you come back in an hour? No, it has been 8 days. There was a hurricane. I need my generator now. Sir, do you want to be part of this investigation? Because if you continue to hold my property illegally, I will make sure the detective knows. That got her attention. She sighed. Fine. I will release the generator, but you still need to pay today's storage and the remaining fees. I'm not paying another cent. You are lucky I'm not suing you for holding my property illegally. We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, she picked up the phone and made a call. I could not hear what was said, but she did not look happy. Fine, she said after hanging up. Take it. We will bill the HOA for the unpaid storage fees. 20 minutes later, I was loading my generator onto a rented trailer. It was one of the sweetest moments of my life. I drove straight home and reinstalled it. Getting it started was tricky after it had been sitting for over a week, but finally, it roared to life. For the first time in 4 days, I had power. I turned on the air conditioning and stood in front of the vent, savoring the cool air. I charged my phone. I made a hot meal. Small luxuries that felt like miracles. That evening, I posted a photo in the neighborhood group. It was my generator running with my house lit up in the background. The caption read, "Generator successfully retrieved. Thanks to everyone for your support. And thanks to Florida Statute 720.3045. The reactions and comments poured in. People were celebrating. Someone posted a GIF of fireworks, and then, about an hour later, Brenda posted again. I have retained legal counsel regarding the defamatory statements being made against me and the HOA. Anyone continuing to make false claims will be held accountable. But it was too late. The damage was done. The recall petition now had over 200 signatures. People were organizing, and the story had been picked up by national news outlets. The next day, a producer from a morning talk show called. They wanted me to appear on their show to discuss HOA overreach. I agreed. Marcus helped me prepare. "Stick to the facts," he said. "Don't get emotional. Let the story speak for itself, and emphasize the law. This isn't just about you being wronged. It's about HOAs illegally restricting hurricane safety equipment in Florida." I flew to New York 2 days later. The power was still out in my neighborhood, but my generator was keeping my house running. A neighbor agreed to check on my house while I was gone. The interview went well. The hosts were sympathetic and outraged on my behalf. I explained the whole situation calmly and clearly, focusing on the Florida statute and the fact that Brenda had violated state law. When I got back to Florida, Detective Morrison called. "Mr. Armstrong, we've completed the preliminary investigation. I have interviewed Mrs. Patterson and the other board members. Mrs. Patterson is claiming ignorance of the statute, but we found something interesting." "What's that?" "The HOA's lawyer sent them a memo 2 years ago specifically warning them about Florida Statute 720.3045 and advising them to revise their covenant language to comply with state law. Mrs. Patterson received a copy of this memo. She knew. So she knowingly violated the law. It appears so. We are moving forward with charges. Theft for the illegal seizure of your property and potentially some other charges related to abuse of position and fraudulent pretenses. The state attorney's office will make the final determination." "What about the other board members?" Gary and Mike both stated they relied on Mrs. Patterson's representations that the tow was legal. Patricia Cole also received the memo and was aware of the statute, so she may face charges as well. But she did not directly order your generator to be towed, which complicates things. A week later, I received a notice that an emergency HOA meeting had been called. The purpose: to vote on removing Brenda Patterson as president. I attended, along with what seemed like half the neighborhood. The community center was packed. People were standing along the walls. Brenda sat at the front table, her lawyer beside her. She looked defiant but also scared. Gary, as vice president, ran the meeting. "We are here to vote on removing Brenda Patterson from her position as HOA president due to concerns about her enforcement practices and recent legal issues." Brenda's lawyer stood up. "My client maintains that she acted in good faith and within her authority." "Sit down," someone yelled from the crowd. "We all saw the news. We know she broke the law." The lawyer looked flustered. Brenda whispered something to him. Tom Henderson stood up. "I move that we remove Brenda Patterson as president, effective immediately." "I second," someone else called out. "All in favor?" Gary asked. A forest of hands went up. It was almost everyone in the room. "All opposed?" Brenda raised her hand. Her lawyer raised his hand. Maybe 3 other people raised their hands. The motion passes. Brenda Patterson is removed as HOA president. Brenda stood up abruptly, her face red. "This is illegal. You cannot just remove me." "Actually, we can," Gary said, consulting the HOA bylaws. Section 8 allows for removal of board members by majority vote of homeowners in cases of malfeasance or conduct detrimental to the community. "I will sue every single one of you." "Good luck with that," Tom called out. "We will be suing the HOA for all the illegal fines you've imposed." Brenda stormed out, her lawyer hurrying after her. The meeting continued. Mike was elected as the new president. One of his first acts was to pass a motion officially acknowledging that the generator covenant language was unenforceable due to state law, and that all previous fines related to generators would be refunded. I would be getting my $3,000 back. 2 weeks later, my power was finally restored. I kept the generator, of course, properly maintained and ready for the next hurricane. And 3 weeks after that, I received notice that Brenda Patterson had been formally charged with grand theft, abuse of position, and fraud. Patricia Cole was charged as an accessory. Their mugshots made the local news. The trial was set for 6 months later, but Brenda's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to theft and abuse of position. She was sentenced to 1-year probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to me and 3 other homeowners whose generators had been similarly towed over the previous year. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state of Florida. Patricia took her case to trial and was acquitted of the accessory charge, though she resigned from the HOA board in disgrace. The HOA itself underwent a major restructuring. Mike, as the new president, hired a new lawyer who specialized in HOA law and made sure all our covenants were updated to comply with Florida statutes. Several of the more ridiculous rules were eliminated entirely. I stayed in touch with several of the homeowners I had met through this ordeal. We formed a sort of informal watchdog group to make sure the HOA never again overstepped its authority. Tom Henderson installed his own generator, prominently displayed in his front yard. Nobody said a word. 6 months after the hurricane, I was sitting on my back patio, enjoying a cold drink when my phone rang. It was a producer from a documentary series about HOA disputes. They wanted to feature my story. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I think I have had enough publicity." "We would pay you for your participation." "How much?" $5,000. I thought about it. That would cover what I had lost in spoiled food and other expenses during the power outage. "All right," I said, "let's do it." The documentary aired 8 months later. It was well done, highlighting not just my story but the broader issue of HOAs overreaching their authority and how state laws often existed to protect homeowners but were not well known or enforced. I became a minor celebrity in the HOA reform movement. I started getting invited to speak at homeowner association meetings across Florida, sharing my story and educating people about their rights. It was strange how one backup generator had changed my life. If Brenda had not towed it, if the hurricane had not hit, if I had not fought back, none of this would have happened. I would still be just another homeowner, quietly following the rules, not making waves. But sometimes you have to make waves. Sometimes you have to stand up to petty tyrants who abuse whatever small amount of power they have been given. The funny thing is, I actually grew to appreciate living in an HOA community. When it's run properly, by reasonable people who understand that rules should serve the community rather than the other way around, it works well. Our neighborhood looked nice, property values were stable, and people generally got along. But it only takes one person, one Brenda, to turn it into a nightmare. A year after the hurricane, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I never wanted to be involved in HOA politics, but people kept asking me to run, and I figured I owed it to the community to make sure we never went back to the old ways. My first act as a board member was to propose a new rule. Any board member found to be violating the same rules they were enforcing on others would be automatically removed from the board. It passed unanimously. I also pushed for more transparency. All board meetings were now recorded and posted online. All financial records were made easily accessible to homeowners, and any fine over $100 required approval from the full board, not just the president. These seemed like common-sense reforms, but they made a huge difference in how the HOA operated. I never did see Brenda again after her sentencing, I heard she moved out of the neighborhood, probably to get away from the constant reminders of her downfall. Part of me almost felt bad for her. She had been so obsessed with enforcing rules and maintaining control that she had destroyed her own life in the process. But then, I remembered sitting in the dark for 4 days during a hurricane. No power, no way to preserve food or stay cool, all because she refused to admit she was wrong. And my sympathy evaporated pretty quickly. 2 years after the hurricane, Hurricane Michael threatened South Florida. I had my generator ready. So did half the neighborhood. This time we were prepared. The storm ended up veering north at the last minute, sparing us the worst of it. We only lost power for 6 hours. But knowing I had that generator, knowing I was ready, gave me a peace of mind I had not realized I was missing. I thought about writing a book about the whole experience. How I survived my HOA or something like that. But honestly, I was tired of reliving it. I had told the story so many times, to so many news outlets and documentaries and HOA reform groups, that I was ready to move on. Besides, I had a new project. I was working with a state legislator to strengthen Florida's laws protecting homeowners from HOA overreach. We were proposing a bill that would create a state-level HOA ombudsman, someone homeowners could appeal to when they felt their HOA was acting illegally or unfairly. It was slow work, dealing with the legislature. Lots of committees and hearings and revisions, but it felt important. If I could prevent even one other person from going through what I had gone through, it would be worth it. One evening, about 3 years after the whole generator incident, I was having dinner with Tom Henderson and some other neighbors. We were talking about how much the neighborhood had changed. "Remember when we were all terrified of getting violation notices?" Tom said. "I used to measure my grass twice a week to make sure it was not too long. I remember when the Johnsons got fined because their Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white," someone else said. We all laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that comes from shared trauma. We had all lived through the Brenda era. "You know what the craziest part is?" I said. I moved into an HOA community specifically because I wanted to avoid the hassle of dealing with bad neighbors and poorly maintained properties. I wanted someone else to handle the rules and enforcement. "And instead you became the guy fighting the HOA," Tom said. "Yeah, funny how that works out." As I drove home that night, I passed by Brenda's old house. New owners had moved in, a young couple with a baby. They had installed solar panels on the roof and a battery backup system in their garage. The HOA had approved it without complaint. Times had changed. We had changed them. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at my house. My generator was still there in its concrete pad, properly maintained and ready for the next emergency. You could barely see it from the street, hidden behind my privacy fence. But even if you could see it, nobody would say a word. Because now everyone understood what I had learned the hard way. When it comes to hurricane preparedness in Florida, common sense has to trump covenant rules. I went inside, poured myself a drink, and opened my laptop. The legislator had sent me the latest draft of the HOA reform bill. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing it, making notes, suggesting changes. It was tedious work, nothing like the dramatic confrontation with Brenda or the news interviews or the trial. But it was satisfying in its own way. Sometimes the fight is loud and public. Sometimes it is quiet and bureaucratic. Both matter. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw you quoted in the Sun Sentinel article about HOA reform. Nice work, little brother." I smiled and texted back. "Could not have done it without your help. You did all the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction." I thought about that. He was right in a way. Nobody had forced me to fight back against Brenda. I could have just paid the fines, evacuated for the hurricane, and moved on with my life. Plenty of people did exactly that when faced with HOA overreach. But I had been angry, not just about the generator, but about the principle of the thing. About someone abusing a tiny amount of power to make other people's lives harder. About rules being enforced selectively, based on personal whim rather than fairness. And that anger had led me to fight back, which had led to Brenda's downfall, the HOA reforms, the media attention, the legislative work. One backup generator. That is what it had taken to change everything. I finished my drink and closed my laptop. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful evening, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze blowing through the palm trees. Tomorrow, I would keep working on the legislation. Tomorrow, I would go to another HOA board meeting and review another budget proposal and discuss another covenant revision. But tonight, I was just going to sit on my patio and enjoy the peace and quiet. The generator hummed softly in the background, always ready, a constant reminder of what I had fought for and why it mattered. And somewhere out in the Atlantic, the next hurricane season was already beginning, new storms forming and dissipating, the eternal cycle of weather and preparation. But this time I was ready. We all were, and that made all the difference.